Once again, Central America's poorest and most vulnerable are met by the full might of the region's security forces. Between 6,000 and 9,000 migrants fleeing.
It's time to get that daily news. I ain't watching TV, I'ma log on to YouTube. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Talking about that raw, uncut news. You a fool. You believe in mainstream and local news. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. And 411, keep the 411. On a sensitive subject, keep it 100. Don't bite no tongue. If you cannot take the truth, then this is finna hurt. Who's to say if it's a round or a flat earth? Stick to the facts. What's some feelings? I don't do no capping. Read that paper, seen that news. Now you know what happened. Playing a pretty picnic, but they control that weather. Same crisis actors, like we don't know no better. Thing about the truth always come to the light. Problem is too many, all bark, no bite. Like muscle, no might. I don't know what happened to them, but I know the way they said somebody ain't right. It's time to get that daily news. I ain't watching TV, I'ma log on to YouTube. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Talking about that raw, uncut news. You a fool. You believe in mainstream and local news. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe.
Se busque el diálogo.
We should have a dialogue with the migrants.
Con los migrantes. Esto en Honduras.
In Honduras, that is, and in Guatemala.
Que se les atienda.
So that they can be looked after.
Para que,
and so that they don't enter any country by force.
A ningún país por la fuerza.
The migrants are not expected to give up their mission. After all, it is the incoming US administration that is fueling their hopes.
The Biden administration was releasing illegal immigrants into our communities who had COVID. The Biden administration was spreading COVID in South Texas yesterday because of their lack of constraint of testing and quarantining people who'd come across the border illegally. The Biden administration was exposing Texans to COVID. That is Neanderthal-type approach to dealing with the COVID situation.
What we're dealing with 108 positives that we know about so far for COVID coming across our border. Are they in quarantine? Are they? How can we keep up with these people? Are we trying?
Look, Harris, we can. And look, the DHS secretary this week lied to the American people, Harris. And look, that doesn't bring me pleasure to say this when he said there wasn't a crisis. Absolutely. Look, in the middle of a global pandemic, when less than 8% of our our own citizens have received the vaccine. Kids are still not in school. Businesses are still not open. People are still out of a job. Their way to shut down this virus is to open up our borders and encourage and incentivize illegal immigration and then reinstate catch and release. And that's exactly what happened. And Harris, it's not just unaccompanied minors. We've seen a skyrocket more than double since the election, but also with the overall flow of illegal immigration. We're back to almost 5,000 every single day being apprehended trying to illegally enter this country. It's absolutely remarkable.
And just to reiterate, you said, no, we can't keep up with them as they come here being positive or otherwise, is what I heard you say. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was pressed on those 108 who were released, those migrants who tested positive for COVID-19. Here she is.
At least 108 migrants have tested positive for COVID-19 after crossing the border. What is the administration doing to make sure that this doesn't contribute to spreading of COVID-19?
Our guidance, regardless of status, is testing positive for COVID-19 or experiencing COVID-like symptoms is to isolate, continue to social distance, wear a mask, and seek medical attention if needed.
So if we ever, Mark, get Joe Biden at the lectern, here's what I would ask him in a follow-up to that. Remember when he said maybe we should lock down travel between Florida because of the B117 variant, because he thought it was going to spread all over the place. It hasn't done it yet. Scientifically, we haven't been shown the proof of that yet. It is spreading, I'm sure, like everything else. He would rather lock down Florida than keep the people out of the country in Mexico while they try to get asylum instead of bringing them here positive. I don't understand that.
Harris, nor do I, and I've been doing this for a long time. Look, your listeners need to understand, in the middle of a global pandemic, these people are taking a dangerous trek, navigating through multiple COVID hotspots in Mexico. And then once they get to our border, they're kept in overcrowded, unsanitary stash houses for days and weeks, thrown in tractor trailers. These are COVID petri dishes, I refer to them. And that's exactly what this administration is encouraging. Look, what was effective under the Trump administration was the CDC's order that, look, the overwhelming majority of people during the global pandemic, we were processing them at the border and returning them to Mexico. We were not releasing into the interior United States. And now the numbers are exploding. And right now, up to 35% of people right now illegally entering are being processed outside of Title 42 and being allowed into the country. The majority are unaccompanied minors and families, and they're being released into every major metropolitan city in this country right now. And their strategy isn't to test. Their strategy is to tell the cartels, pretty please don't come yet.
Border Patrol agents say the 13 people killed were among more than 40 migrants they believe entered the U.S. illegally through a hole cut in the border fence.
At least 6 survivors of the crash are still being treated in San Diego hospitals.
So we're getting a closer look tonight at the 10-foot-long breach at the border wall that agents in El Centro say smugglers used to sneak in dozens of migrants yesterday. One SUV burst into flames. The other, carrying 25 people, crashed. Construction crews got deep down in the trench at the very spot where there was a hole in the border fence east of Calexico. Workers used measuring tape while closing up the wide gap. Agents say 2 SUVs drove through early Tuesday morning. Border Patrol says its surveillance shows about 44 migrants getting into the U.S. through 2 separate SUVs. One, a red Chevrolet Suburban carrying 19 people, caught fire, and its passengers escaped and were found hiding in the brush before being taken into custody. While the burgundy Ford Expedition, crammed with 25 people, crashed into a tractor trailer in Holtville, killing 13 people. The Expedition's 22-year-old driver is among the dead. 6 survivors of the crash are being treated at trauma centers in San Diego. The 68-year-old big rig driver, Joel Beltran, is recovering in the hospital. Investigators say the SUV had 2 seats in the front, but all of the other seats were removed from the back to cram in more people.
Some of the victims were ejected from the vehicle. There's some walking wounded that pulled themselves out of the vehicles.
The border fencing is now repaired with reinforcements as investigators dig into the dangerous smuggling attempt.
The horrific crash happened at sunrise.
We need as many ambulances as you can handle right now.
An SUV somehow packed with more than 24 people ranging in age from 15 to 53 collided with a big rig along this stretch of road near El Centro, California, just a few miles from the U.S.-Mexico border. 12 people, including the SUV driver, died at the scene, another at the hospital.
Some people were ejected onto the pavement, onto the ground, that passed away as a result of those injuries. Other people were found deceased within the vehicle, and then some of the walking wounded were able to pull themselves out of the vehicles.
But tonight, several are clinging to life after being flown or taken by ambulance to nearby hospitals.
The ones that came into us had injuries ranging from fractures to head injuries, life-threatening head injuries.
Investigators are examining skid marks and other evidence as they piece together what happened. The 1998 Ford Expedition was designed to seat only 8 people.
How do you fit 25 people in a vehicle like that?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I know there isn't enough seatbelts in there for all of them.
And tonight, in an unusual move, the National Transportation Safety Board is sending a team to investigate the crash.
So the question is, are they farm workers or immigrants? We don't know that. It's too early in the investigation to say what they were doing and where they're coming from.
Because in order for us to stop this pandemic, we need to focus on the highest risk individuals. And currently, as you can see in the farm worker community with the devastating rates of infection and deaths, that is not being done. And so we need to help the more vulnerable populations, the ones that disproportionately are getting infected and that are dying from this disease.
The region is the 4th most populous county in California and has recorded the 2nd highest number of cases, 44,679 and 879 deaths. But without additional health care benefits or proper social distancing and precautions, the number of infected farm workers who live hand to mouth could explode.
Free-for-all at America's southern border. A group of migrants crossing into the U.S. were spotted wearing "Biden, please let us in" T-shirts. And while the White House refuses to call what is going on a crisis, a leaked memo says border agents are being overwhelmed. According to Axios, hundreds of unaccompanied minors are being taken into custody on a daily basis, and Border Patrol is struggling to deal with the skyrocketing number. You know, it's kind of interesting that you've got all these people coming into the border with these Biden T-shirts, and the issue is, are these desperate asylum seekers, or is this part of a coordinated effort? And if they're desperately seeking asylum, where did they get the Biden T-shirts?
But I know this, Judge. The cartels are getting filthy rich. I'm beginning to think Hunter might be on the payroll. If you're a parent in Central America, you pay a coyote $5,000 to get your minor across the border. And once they're across, because of the amnesty promises and all of the other soft border policies, they bring back the chain migration, and then that whole family can come through. So if it's $5,000 a child and they're expecting 117,000 child migrants to come across this year, that's $500 million in the pockets of the drug cartels. The drug cartels control Mexico. Obrador's not in charge. They're in charge. And now they're control of our southern border. You don't think everyone that comes across, adult or minor, owes something to those cartels? They know who their families are. And when they tell that illegal immigrant, once they get to Chicago or Long Island, I need you to do this, I need you to do that, they'll do it, or else they'll kill their family back home. Cartels own this country at this point, and Joe Biden's letting them do it.
All right. Well, Dana, I mean, what is the excuse for, loosening up the restrictions on illegals in terms of COVID? And yet, the criticism that we just talked about in the previous block of any governor who wants to kind of, get rid of the mask mandate as a legal requirement. I mean, it's counterindicated.
So looking at this as an outsider, it seems to me that none of this was very well thought through, except for that it definitely was, let's do something the opposite of what President Trump was doing. And there were some things that maybe you could have done better. But I brought a list for Jesse on a few things. One of the first things was promising an eviction moratorium. That's one thing that will happen. Ending the Remain in Mexico policy. That was actually a good policy. And the Mexicans were participating. And then when all of a sudden that went away, so now the Mexicans don't have to do that anymore. They nominated a health secretary, Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra, the Attorney General from California who wants to be HHS secretary. He advocated for free health care for illegal immigrants when he was in California. That's one of the reasons that his nominations had a little bit of the skids in the Senate. And if he gets pushed through by the Democrats, he will be the first one that ever goes without a majority vote in the committee. And I think that's partly it, because if you start to tell people, oh, you get to do all of these things. Plus, you are going to get free health care. That's not going to be a deterrent. Two other things on my list, offering the life-saving COVID vaccines to them. Now, the White House has said no, but there's enough out there that you think, well, something is going on there. Look, I'm not saying that all humans should have access to the vaccines, but should Americans be first? I think arguably you could say yes. And then working to defund the border security measures. We're basically, saying that the wall, and Juan calls it a fictional wall, doing it with the wall. I think border security, again, it's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's the foundation that you need to do all the other stuff that you want to do.
Showing that during the last week of February, Border Patrol referred an average of 321 migrant kids each day to HHS shelters, which is soon, they're all soon going to be at maximum capacity. They're about 94%. It's actually worse, though, than this. The Washington Post immigration reporter is tweeting that the number of families and minors arriving is expected to be the highest in over 20 years, and the government will use hotels if it runs out of space.
Well, the administration has publicly admitted, which is rather shocking, that 100% of minors traveling alone, many of them teenagers, are being resettled and released all throughout the United States, all 50 states. But what they're not telling you is that most family units are now also being released too. And that's why we're seeing now 4,000 apprehensions a day. Because word has spread, not just in Central America, but throughout the world, that if you come as a family or as a minor, you're going to be released. That's not being publicly disclosed. So while they're saying publicly, oh no, we're still turning away family units, in reality, the majority of family units are now being released into the interior of the country. And a lot of them are going to go into communities that don't have the hospital capacity or the healthcare resources to deal with them. And that's going to mean during a pandemic, low-income Americans are going to be denied the healthcare resources that they need. So this really exacerbates a public health crisis in addition to a national security crisis.
We do not have the capacity now to address the asylum seekers' claims because that system was dismantled in its entirety by the prior administration. We have to address those implications not only for the benefit of the communities in the United States, but for the migrants themselves.
Stephen, this wouldn't be happening, right? Would it, if they hadn't rolled back the Trump border policies and rolled out the red carpet for illegals?
The comment from Secretary Mayorkas is an offense to human intelligence and reason. When we left office, the border was fully secure. If you came illegally, you were detained and you were safely returned home. That is the definition of border security, that if someone crosses illegally, border agents can apprehend them, and then they can be safely returned to the country they came from. We had that system in place because we had deals with Mexico, we had deals with Central America, we reformed our asylum regulations, we reformed our intake procedures, we expedited return flights home, we had charter flights leaving every single day to have a safe, secure, humane border. He and his fellow political appointees at DHS dismantled all of that. They dismantled the most effective asylum system that had ever been created in this country, and they launched this border crisis. And he needs to own up to that fact and not lie to the American people and not disrespect the ICE officers and border agents who painstakingly achieved that security plan. And I'll say one other thing. While they're pretending to be compassionate, not only are their plans deeply injuring American families and American communities, but they're destroying the Northern Triangle. Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador cannot possibly succeed if this mass exodus of young people is allowed to continue. Those countries won't have a future. They're sentencing those countries to generations of poverty and misery.
And the Biden administration grappling with the situation at the border with Mexico. The number of migrants trying to cross into the U.S. is rising, and the government's resources are being pushed to the limit.
Listen to this one. Border Patrol agents encountered a migrant at the southern border at least 78,000 times in January alone. That's the highest for that month in at least a decade. And how the Biden administration tackles this problem has them under fire this morning.
This morning, the Border Patrol planning to send more agents to the southern border as an influx of migrants there hope to cross. And despite scenes like this, the new Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says this is not a crisis.
I think there is a challenge at the border that we are managing.
But the reality, the numbers are on the rise. Every day, Border Patrol agents apprehend an average of 200 children crossing without their parents. And the thousands of beds in government facilities where those kids would be cared for, nearly all taken. And now the administration is under fire from some in their own party who say those children are being housed in the very tent cities Democrats criticize the Trump administration for using. The Biden White House says they're just trying to keep kids safe while they work to reunite them with family or send them to a foster program, as officials attempt to rebuild what they call an immoral immigration policy left behind by President Trump.
It takes time to build out of the depths of cruelty that the administration before us established.
As ABC's Matt Gutman found, the rollback of Trump policies is giving asylum seekers like these hope at this border encampment in Matamoros, Mexico.
They are just some of the 25,000 migrants that have been waiting, some of them for up to 2 years, for their chance to have their cases heard in the U.S.
But even as so many families hope it might now be their turn, the message from the White House, don't cross, not yet anyway.
We are not saying don't come. We are saying don't come now, because we will be able to deliver a safe and orderly process to them as quickly as possible.
The president is making it far more difficult, and he's endangering not just Texans, he's endangering people across the entire country, because what has happened is people come across the border, and the Border Patrol will process their paperwork. They get on a bus, and they scatter across the entire country. And as you now know, many of them have tested positive for COVID. So what President Biden is doing, he's allowing people to come in here who are testing positive for COVID, and they're going across the entire country. Who knows how many people they are infecting? This is a very dangerous situation. We're calling on the president to end this scheme right now.
Biden's radical immigration policies aren't just illegal. They're immoral, they're heartless, and they are a betrayal of our nation's core values. It's a terrible thing that's happened.
So, as you noted, Texas received a nationwide injunction against the Biden administration's plan to suspend all removals of illegal aliens for 100 days, which, of course, would be plainly illegal and utterly unconstitutional. The bad news, Maria, is that the Department of Homeland Security, only days later, went around and issued brand new guidance to get around the judge's injunction that is a functional deportation pause, suspending probably 95% of removals. And it's every bit as illegal and every bit as unconstitutional. And my hope is that the judge in Texas will see that the Department of Homeland Security and the Biden administration has tried to make an end run around his injunction. And that new policy primarily will benefit people in the country illegally who've been convicted or charged with serious crimes. I mean, across the board, what you have seen is a systematic effort to dismantle and destroy every single lawful tool and authority that is used to protect the American homeland from illegal immigration, trafficking, and smuggling. Innocent people are being hurt every single day because of these changes. Just to run through a few. What you have right now on the border, the humanitarian crisis that's been created because the Biden administration eliminated the tools to safely return migrants to their home country and restored catch and release, is pushing families, women, and children into the hands of vicious criminal cartels that engage in abuse of the worst kind imaginable. At the same time, it makes our nation less secure because border agents have to be redirected away from counter-narcotics, counter-trafficking, counter-intelligence. And instead, they have to be put into a humanitarian setting to provide basic care and daily necessities to the thousands of people flooding across to take advantage of Joe Biden's catch and release policies. The cartels aren't stupid. They know what they're doing. They'll send across massive numbers of family units, massive numbers of children to one area, diverting border agents, diverting our assets so they can push across dangerous contraband. So not only is this going to bankrupt our healthcare system, not only is this going to spread COVID, not only is it going to drain our treasury, but it's going to mean more drugs, more weapons, and more criminal elements are able to get into the United States. We have a border for a reason.
Yes, narcotics detectives here at JSO headquarters say those men were using an apartment to basically run their cocaine trafficking operation. And they said it was an operation that was discovered by a U.S. postal inspector who was monitoring suspicious packages leaving Puerto Rico. The investigation into these three men began back in January when a postal inspector in Puerto Rico alerted the Jacksonville Police Narcotics Unit about a suspicious package en route to a Jacksonville address.
The package contained a teddy bear that had 2 kilograms of cocaine and a tracker that the suspects had shoved up inside of the teddy bear.
Police say the tracker was used to make sure the package got to its intended destination. The postal inspector also located another package from Jacksonville to Puerto Rico that was stuffed with cash. Police say that package containing money was sent by Edgar Lopez and his brother Yadiel from a Jacksonville apartment complex on Mayport Road, where Yadiel Lopez works as a maintenance worker.
A few weeks later, another suspicious package from Puerto Rico is addressed to the same apartment complex on Mayport Road.
Police later determined that package contained narcotics. They also say they learned Edgar Lopez and Cassie Iglesias were business acquaintances.
And they are seen several times in our community, what we now believe making drug deals.
Last Tuesday, JSO got wind that another package was en route to Jacksonville from Puerto Rico. Once again, the package was a teddy bear stuffed with 1 kilo of cocaine. Jacksonville police took all three men in custody when the package was delivered to the address. Police say when they searched the apartment, they found 5 kilos of cocaine and more than $130,000 in cash. A search of one suspect's vehicle turned up 4 firearms.
You said it is not kids in cages. We've seen some photos now of containers. Is there a better description? Is it kids in containers instead of kids in cages? What is the White House's description of this facility?
Well, let me give a broader description of what's happening here. We have a number of unaccompanied minors, children who are coming into the country without their families.
Since January, a large influx of migrants have entered the country at the U.S.-Mexico border. This has forced President Biden to rely on some controversial Trump-era practices while officials draft new legislation to address the situation. But the administration has remained relatively quiet on what exactly it's working on. For more on this, let's bring in Sabrina Rodriguez. Sabrina is an immigration reporter for Politico. Welcome, Sabrina. So we have not heard a lot of details about the president's plans to overhaul immigration. Why might that be?
Yeah, well, the Biden administration is finding itself now in this sensitive spot of, Biden on the campaign trail promised that he was going to undo a lot of the Trump administration's immigration legacy. But at the same time, they don't want to promote people coming to the border at the moment. So right now, Biden has said, we're undoing all these things that the Trump administration did. We can't tell you all the details on what we're doing because we don't want to send the wrong message, but we swear we're doing it. So right now, it's kind of this situation of figuring out what the best policy will be going forward. And the Biden administration's message is now is the time for migrants to come out how they're going to roll out these policies that can take a significant amount of time.
So, Sabrina, what has the Biden administration done so far, and what other promises remain?
So far, we've seen on the first day of the Biden administration, they announced what they would like their comprehensive immigration reform bill to look like. And since then, it's been introduced in Congress, in the House and in the Senate. The reality is that it's challenging to pass anything on the Hill at this point, and seeing how sensitive of a subject it has been historically, and especially after the Trump administration, it's going to be challenging to pass it. So Biden, in the meantime, has signed several executive orders, some involving reuniting families that were separated by the Trump administration, as well as starting to set the message and set the pace for things on asylum, as well as legal immigration. But a lot of it at this point is setting up reviews and asking for plans and recommendations from his administration, which will take time.
Well, you reported that in January, more than 5,700 children arrived at the U.S. border alone. More arrivals are expected in the months to come. Sabrina, what is contributing to this uptick?
It's absolutely this change of administration that we've seen. You know, the Biden administration, the way that they are handling unaccompanied children has been different than the Trump administration did. At this point, if the vast majority of migrants arriving at the border are being turned away, they are immediately being sent back under a Trump era pandemic rule that because of the pandemic would send people back immediately. But with unaccompanied children, the Biden administration decided they didn't want to apply the same policy. So they are taking in these children, but the reality is that there are constraints in capacity, especially as they're trying to observe certain social distancing protocols and handle things in a different way than the Trump administration did. So it's at this point, we're seeing an uptick, and it's going to continue. I mean, it's expected that as we head towards this summer, there will continue to be a significantly larger number of migrants arriving.
So some progressive Democrats like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have slammed the Biden administration for putting unaccompanied migrant children in detention facilities. What exactly is the criticism, and do they have suggestions on where these children should be housed instead?
Yeah, the Biden administration has come out forcefully to defend itself after the criticism that we saw last week from progressives like Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and a lot of immigrant advocates saying this was never right under the Trump administration, under previous administrations, and it's not okay and it's not acceptable under this administration. What they want to see is a more, and I quote, as the Biden administration has sold it, a fair and humane immigration system that doesn't put children in these kinds of shelters.
Well, last week, more than 60 Democratic lawmakers publicly urged Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to end migrant expulsions via Title 42. What is Title 42, and what would some of the consequences be if its use was ended?
So Title 42 has been the declaration that the Trump administration used since March of 2020 to expel migrants immediately arriving. It's done so in the name of public health, in the name of the pandemic, to preserve public safety and public health in the United States as well as for the migrants. However, progressives and immigrant advocates have said, you know, that was just an excuse from the Trump administration to effectively seal off the border. Right now, if you arrive, the vast majority of people are sent back immediately without any kind of due process, without being able to, you know, try and seek asylum or try and stay in the United States. They get sent back. So the question right now is, if the Biden administration were to stop using Title 42, would that result in more people arriving at the border? And the resounding answer from migration experts, whether Democrat or Republican, is that absolutely. This is one of the only things, the tools that the Biden administration has at this point to prevent more people from arriving, especially as they don't have the capacity at this moment to handle it, given the pandemic, as well as their rollback of all the Trump administration policies.
Look, I'd like to start by acknowledging, which I'm sure all of you do as well, sending my prayers for the health and safety of the First Lady and President of the United States after they tested positive for COVID-19. My wife Jill and I prayed that they'll make a quick and full recovery. This is not a matter of politics. It's a bracing reminder to all of us that we have to take this virus seriously. It's not going away automatically. We have to do our part to be responsible. It means following the science, listening to the experts, washing our hands, social distancing. It means wearing a mask in public, and it means encouraging others to do so as well. It means having masking mandates nationwide. The director of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, Dr. Redfield said, and I quote, and he held up a mask, he said, "These face masks are the most important, powerful public health tool we have." Then he held the mask up again and said, "This face mask is more guaranteed to protect me against COVID than a vaccine," end of quote. Leading scientists from the University of Washington tell us that we can save more than 100,000 American lives in the next 100 days alone if everyone wore a mask in public. So let me repeat that because it's so important. We can save 100,000 lives in the next 100 days, according to the head of the CDC, if everyone wears a mask in public. So be patriotic. It's not about being a tough guy. It's about doing your part. Wearing a mask is not only going to protect you, but it also protects those around you. Your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, husband, wife, neighbor, coworker. Don't just do it for yourself. Do it for the people you love, the people you work with. The seriousness of this virus also underscores that we need regular testing with results turned around rapidly and that's available to everyone. It's not just the folks in the White House or who travel with me that deserve regular testing. It's folks in the meatpacking and food processing plants, grocery store workers. Every single American deserves safety and peace of mind. And it means we need transparency. Those who test positive need to participate in contact tracing so that everyone who they may have exposed can get tested themselves. That's how you stop transmission for any epidemic.